What up, fuckers?
I want to say I'm not in prison, this is just university accommodation. I was about to make this video a bunch of VA stuff, but then my friend Sean messaged me with a link to a certain Nintendo tweet. Then in quick succession, at least two different servers began talking about it. As of the time of writing this script and likely publishing this video, we actually have very little information in regards to what the live-action Zelda would be. So I got thinking, what would I write for a Zelda movie? Now, if you've been following me on Twitch for most of this year, you'll probably know I'm a massive Zelda fan. And while I obviously doubt the Zelda film would live up to my expectations, I do hope it turns out good. But until then, here's my pitch for a live-action Legend of Zelda movie. Before you smartasses in the comments mention Avi Arad being the main producer Miyamoto is working with, and how that automatically means the movie will be a failure, this video isn't about Arad, so if you want to talk about that, there's plenty of people on Reddit happy to agree with your stance on that. Now, to start, I need to look over the entire Zelda franchise and pick and choose a few things I want to include. My first thought was whether do I simply adapt one of the games or try to write my own original story for the film. Now I did go back and forth on this a bit. Originally I went with adapting a game and landed on 3 different games that would probably be the best to adapt. Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, and Breath of the Wild. Skyward Sword makes sense to adapt because it's the series' origin story, and it has a relatively small main cast which makes writing any character development for me easier. Ocarina of Time makes sense because of its importance to Zelda lore in the grand scheme of things. For a long time, Ocarina was considered the best Zelda game to be made, and it also helped lay the foundations of certain aspects of the series going forward in terms of storytelling, not to mention the game is responsible for the timeline split, which is one of the most recognizable traits in the series' lore to most fans. Breath of the Wild also makes sense because it's the best-selling game in the series, and how very bare bones the story actually is, it wouldn't be hard to use some creative liberty to flesh certain aspects out of the story. Now let me explain why none of those work. Going backwards, Breath of the Wild's story being so bare bones is what makes it difficult to adapt, in the sense I do not like it, at least in comparison to other games in the series, and improving the story of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom by proxy could almost certainly be an entirely separate video on its own, which I may actually make in some point in the future. As for Ocarina of Time and Skyward Sword, the endings almost set up the inevitability of a sequel, which while there's nothing inherently wrong with, I want to leave the possibility of a sequel to be a bit more open-ended than just Ganondorf/Demise is sealed away and marks the heroes with a curse that cannot be broken by conventional methods, thus ensuring their return and all but explicit confirmation of a sequel. And while I could write those endings to be different, I can't help but feel I'd be meddling with those stories too much, because if Ganondorf just straight up dies at the end of Ocarina, then there's no adult timeline, and if Demise dies at the end of Skyward Sword, then there's no Ganondorf or the rest of the series really. With those points in mind, I had the brief thought of, well, why not just adapt Hyrule Warriors? But even when that came up, I thought it was stupid, and I'm not going to revisit it because fuck me, I don't want to write for the overwhelming amount of characters in the Zelda endgame, so I'm going to do something original instead. Having decided I was going to write something original, I opted to lay out some ground rules for this story. 1. Link remains mostly mute, which especially in terms of movies, could be hard to sell to a studio, but go fuck yourself, this is my fanfic, and I want to try and keep Link as true to character as possible. Naturally, given the existence of dialogue options in the series, Link has to be able to talk to some degree. But a lot of those could be communicated through body language and facial expressions, so when Link does talk, it needs to stand out in comparison to the other ways Link could communicate. Also, I like the idea of maybe using sign language as well, so that could also be a possibility. 2. Ganondorf is more nuanced. Obviously, I was always going to include Ganondorf in this. Now, don't take me saying I want a nuanced Ganondorf as I want a sympathetic Ganondorf, that's just a bad idea. Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time alone shows narrative similarities to the Antichrist and is a little incarnation of Demise's hatred. But I want something more slightly akin to Wind Waker's Ganondorf. Maybe one not as contemplative, but I'd like to show off a bit more of his character. Sure, he's a heartless villain who wants to dominate and destroy, but I want that to not just be stated. I want us to see how he's such a monster, so on and so forth. 3. The matter of the timeline. Given how important the Zelda timeline has been up until recently, I've had to include special consideration as to how it should be approached in the story, and I have. And while I don't want to spoil its inclusion just yet, I want to remind myself that it matters I keep it in mind whilst writing. Now that the introduction script is 2 pages long, allow me to tell you what my ideal Zelda movie would be. So we've got to start at the beginning. We're going to start in a dark chamber. In my mind, I'm thinking of a broken down, unpreserved ancient temple of sorts. And we quickly see a sword mounted on a pedestal at the end of a hallway. This entire setup is supposed to mirror the Temple of Time, if you couldn't tell. Then the main entranceway to this temple bursts open and we see a group of Gerudo warriors enter the temple, led by an Iron Knuckle who escorts none other than Ganondorf into the chamber and towards the sword.
Here it is, Lord Ganondorf, as promised.
I applaud your efforts in locating this place. With this blade, the Gerudo are one step closer to our revenge.
Now, it is important to note we don't ever actually see a shot of Ganondorf's face in this scene, but we do see him wearing an armor similar to that of what we see in Hyrule Warriors. The scene ends with Ganondorf gripping the hilt of the blade, which begins pulsating with dark energy before we cut to the title sequence. Following the title, we cut to this story's Link waking up in a sweat as a result of some kind of a nightmare. He tries to think back on this nightmare as this isn't the first time he's had that exact one, but he can never quite seem to make out the faces in it. Link isn't given much time to ponder this as his bedroom door opens as his sister, Aryll, walks in assuming he's still asleep. Now, I ought to mention here, to avoid creating original characters for this film, I am using pre-existing characters to fill in certain roles, with some exceptions, even if they aren't recurring, hence why Aryll is here. However, she is slightly older than her Wind Waker appearance due to the fact that Link in this story is older than Toon Link and is close to the age of Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess's Links. Aryll teasingly scolds Link for sleeping in before telling him they've got a delivery to make to Castle Town today and that the dad won't be best pleased if Link isn't ready. In this film, Link does have a dad as opposed to a parental figure stand-in like a grandmother, uncle or tree. This is mainly because the idea of Link having actual parents was explored briefly in Breath of the Wild, and we even have concept art for what Breath of the Wild's Link's dad would have looked like. Plus, it's something new that we get to see in terms of story. Now, in this story, Link and Aryll and their father are all farmhands on a sort of communal ranch, similar to how Link starts out in Twilight Princess. Link eventually gets dressed and grabs a plain-looking sword before heading out to meet with his father and other farmhands, all of whom are armed with very basic weaponry. Aryll persists that she wants to join the adults to Castle Town this time because she really wants to see the castle in person, but their dad refuses. Aryll, you know it's not safe for a girl your age to come with us. There's too great a risk of a bandit or Gerudo attack. As it turns out in recent months, both reports of Gerudo pirates and bandits attacking caravans travelling between settlements and towns. Aryll continues to persist, saying she's been getting a lot of practice with her crossbows, but eventually caves and agrees to stay with the supposed safety of the ranch. Link's father then notices Link saddling up on a horse and instructs his son to get down. Don't think I don't see what you're doing, boy. Your job is to keep an eye out for attackers. Epona ain't ready for your riding spirit yet. Link just looks back at his father before sighing and unmounting Epona, and then getting into the carriage with the other farmhands helping to escort the delivery to Castletown. His father mounts Epona and the caravan sets off. During the ride, one of the other caravan members gives the others a list of instructions of how to behave in Castletown. Remember, this isn't the same as delivering to Kakariko or Hateno. The guards are gonna be more strict with us, so keep your hands off your weapons when we arrive. Don't talk back, looking at you, Groose, and for the love of Nehru, don't wander off, especially you, Link. The scene concludes with the caravan approaching Castletown, with Hyrule Castle in the distance. And that is where we're going to end this part. Originally, I was going to make this one long video, but the workload was slightly too much for me to do in the short time I had to get a video out this month. So I've had to split it up into parts in order to not burn myself out. This is a larger project than I anticipated, so I hope you'll stick around as the story continues. The next part should at the very least be up before Christmas, and if time allows for it, I'll be able to make 2 parts over the course of December. Until then, thanks for watching, and see you soon.